Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. It's great to see such a wonderful crowd. Lots of old friends, not old friends, we have no old friends. We only have longtime friends. And lots of new faces. We're really thrilled that you're here. Tonight promises to be a really fascinating evening. But before we get started, please silence your cell phones, anything else that might ring or beep. We're webcasting tonight, so you don't want your cell phone captured on the web for all eternity. I'm Virginia Mecklenburg. It's been my privilege and my pleasure to work with Sam Rose and Julie Walters to bring the Crosscurrents exhibition to the American public. The collection is dazzling. I say this totally immodestly. But even more, the works are compelling and provocative. Never did I imagine that as a curator at the Smithsonian's American Art Museum, would I ever have a chance to show a room full of Picasso paintings, or sculpture by Miro, or Dubuffet, or Flanagan? But we decided last night to declare these European masters to be honorary Americans. And they don't need passports. So much of what they do and say in these exciting and powerful works resonates with the same kinds of things that their American contemporaries were exploring, as well as with artists who were working across time and place. From the cave painters at Altamira, take a quick look at those Picasso ceramics. You'll see evocations of ancient cave painting, to artists that are today dealing with the aftermath of 9/11. All the artists in the show are modernists, but what the collection makes absolutely clear is that modernism is not a moment, it's not a style, and it's certainly not a singular way of approaching subject matter. Instead, each of the artists in the exhibition had a very idiosyncratic vision, but each rejected the conventional to push limits. Frankly, they're all unrepentant experimentalists who took the kinds of risks that impel us to expand our quotidian ways of looking at the world. They make us laugh, they make us understand beauty, and they make us think. It's a special pleasure to have two distinguished scholars to speak with us tonight. The program will last until a little bit after 8. Annie Cohen-Solal will talk first, then we'll take a 20-minute break so Annie can do a book signing. Next, as you'll see in your program, which has a timed agenda, it'll keep us on schedule, we hope. Sam and Julie will talk with us about their collection, and we'll culminate with Gijs van Hensbergen on Picasso. And if we have time at the end, we'd love to take a few questions. Annie Cohen-Solal is an accomplished speaker, she's a writer, she's a curator, and she's also a professor whose work on American art and artists, particularly during the middle years of the 20th century, has been truly groundbreaking. Her 2000 book, called Leo Castelli and His Circle, examines the work of one of my favorite figures in post-war art, the New York art dealer who showed Roy Lichtenstein, Tom Wesselman, Andy Warhol, and not quite single-handedly catapulted pop art to centrality in American culture. Ms. Cohen-Solal is one of those rare professors, though, who totally understands the nature and the importance of the artwork, of the individual object. So she's in constant demand as a curator as well, at the Pompidou in Paris, at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and at any number of other prestigious museums around the world. Her reach is global. She's taught at universities in New York, Berlin, and Jerusalem. I mean, this is an enviable travel schedule. And so brings a universal perspective to her scholarship that is particularly appropriate for the Crosscurrents and exhibition. Please join me in welcoming Annie Cohen-Solal.
Thank you, Virginia. That was, you didn't make one mistake in my resume. It's unique, never happened before. Thank you, I appreciate. I want to say that I have a specific affection for your group, Betsy. because it happens that I introduced some patrons of the Smithsonian to Paris, and it was your first trip, I heard, 12 years ago. And therefore, I do understand the passion of the collectors here. And yesterday night, during this beautiful dinner, I just wished I had gone to Fisher's Island. So I hope I'll be invited if you put up with me and my talk, Mr. Rose. First of all, the microphone, this one, I'm moving here. Virginia, I loved your essay in the catalogue. I think that your approach, which is historical, is something that makes a lot of sense for this collection. Now, I am going to offer you a little promenade, it's French, a little walk through the Sam Rose and Julie Walters collection, throughout my own angle of approach, which is social history of the American artist. I have a great interest for the way the artist is being considered in the United States of America, and your collection gives a particular opening to that. Throughout the works that you have collected, you can precisely understand the shift in the status of the American artist all through the 20th century. So this is going to be my approach. 4 generations of cross-current artists, a historical approach, and a focus on Alexander Calder. First of all, the show is dedicated to Niki de Saint Phalle for many reasons. First of all, because she mesmerized all of you. This is her, with another friend of mine, whom I'm going to meet next Friday, Mr. Johns. And Niki, I must say, was introduced to me by a fascinating character called François Mitterrand. She was very friendly with the French president, and one day he asked me to come and visit him in Italy, and he had come with Niki in Italy to see the Jardin des Tarots, that she did, extraordinary garden. So it was extremely hot, and Mitterrand was wearing a straw hat, which was Niki's hat with flowers on top, because he needed a hat. And she had 2 socks, one green and one yellow. And our French president adored this woman. So this is Niki de Saint Phalle, this fabulous character, whose work is displayed now prominently at the Pompidou Center. Whenever you come in May, I will be delighted to. But this is a little memory of the nice time we had, Betsy, at the Cyclope in Milly-la-Forêt. And this is the Niki we could see here, La Lune, and Nana on a unicorn. So I conceived this presentation as a visit of the collection, illustrated by the artists of the collection. And I will first ask myself about the status of the American artist. My question will be following. When do a specific place, as New York City, for example, start being able to produce a new trend? How does a country, the United States, which used to be a strong, very strong industrial country at the beginning of the 20th century, but remained backwards towards Europe at the time, because of its tradition and in its history, will be able to become a leader in the art world? How does New York start to be a locus, as did in the past such cities as Florence, Rome, Amsterdam, Vienna, or Paris? So this is a question I'm going to ask myself throughout visiting the Rose and Walters collection. Do you agree with this program? Okay, let's go. So 4 generations of American artists. First of all, I call it the early travelers to Europe. and very strongly under the influence of the European model. At the time, the artist in the United States was not considered as a valuable citizen. They were rejected, they were made fun of. The respected human being, the respected person in American society was either the pioneer with guns under his bed or the banker. But the artist was not really respected. Why? It's another talk. I'm coming again if you need me. But nevertheless, that explains why American artists needed to rush to Europe, because Paris was the place where they were respected, where they could go to school, and where they would be legitimized. So they went to, by thousands, they went to the École des Beaux-Arts. They were exhibited at the Salon. They got medals, you know, and they came back empowered. Do you agree, Virginia? Absolutely. So this was in the 19th century, after the Civil War, after 1867. But you don't collect them. You collect the ones who start going in the 20th century. So among them, Elie Nadelman, John Marin, Marsden Hartley, and Charles Demus. Here are the beautiful works you have from them, the beautiful, beautiful works. And, you know, how do they get to Paris? They study at the École des Beaux-Arts, where they have nude models that doesn't exist in the US because of Puritan side, right? They exhibit in the Paris Salon. They feel empowered as artists. They spend time in artist colonies, such as Pont-Aven in Brittany and so on and so forth. And this is what Max Weber, that Jerry Peters knows very well, and Cathy Peters, they know very well Max Weber. That's what Max Weber wrote when he was in Paris in those years. Paris in those years was a veritable melting pot in the history of art. Cézanne's spirit and concept reigned supreme. Young aspiring painters from all over the world sat for hours at a time analyzing Cézanne's color construction and design, his alluring archaic type of beauty and austerity, which rehabilitated and enriched the art and the intrinsic meaning of painting then and for all time. They also joining their compatriots in a very special place, the Stein's Salon, 27 Rue de Fleurus in Montparnasse, Gertrude Stein and Leo Stein. This is her in her salon. This is Leo Stein, Gertrude Stein, Sarah and Michael Stein, the whole family, whose family had immigrated from Germany to the United States before the Civil War, and who came to Paris in 1902, where they bought the absolute cutting edge of the time, Matisse, Picasso, Cézanne, and showed it. Another element from Max Weber: for hours at the Steins, we stood around a large table in the corner of the spacious and well-lighted room, examining portfolios full of drawings by Matisse, Picasso, and others. This salon was a sort of international clearinghouse of ideas and matters of art for the young and aspiring artists from all over the world. Lengthy and involved discussion took place with Leo Stein as moderator and participant. Here one felt free to throw artistic atom bombs, and many cerebral explosions did take place. Okay, how wonderful. I love this quote. So also the American artists were attending the Matisse class in Montparnasse and, you know, studying after Matisse. And, but at the same time in the United States, Edward Steichen was going back and forth between New York and Paris and was providing works to Alfred Stieglitz, who had just opened his gallery, 291, this little niche of modernism on Fifth Avenue, long before the Armory show started. This was Stieglitz's gallery, a beautiful little jewel of a gallery. And he actually did not know about the Armory show before a few days before it started, which is incredible. But there he showed Picasso and Matisse and Rodin and everybody. These are the works he showed, including his wife, future wife, Georgia O'Keeffe, that you collect here, and tells us about him in the collection. Later on, the Armory Show is bringing all kinds of modernist painters to New York in a kind of non-organized show by Walt Kuhn, and these modernists rushed into New York City to the despair of the local artists who feel, what are we going to do now? So what do? They go to New Mexico, to Santa Fe and Taos, right? These guys. But the French artists and the international artists arrive also at the same time to the United States around World War I, because art is deeply embedded into history. And somebody like Picabia is already noticing that New York is a cubist city, the futurist city, with its stupendous skyscrapers and marvelous subways. America is destined to become the first modernist country, a place where the American spirit in its novelty and vigor fills each of its citizens with hope. So while the Americans are discovering Paris, Europeans are discovering the United States around World War I, and Marcel Duchamp, who is the most important of them, traveling to New York, says, I'm not going to New York, I'm leaving Paris. He does not want to stay in Paris. And his influence is going to be enormous on American art. Albert Glaise has also a wonderful way of describing New York. For the first time, it is American art that is attracting Europe, 1915. The European artists are clamoring on our banks, seeking the vital energy that all living art demands. New York inspires me in an amazing way. The great bridges they have built here are as admirable as the most famous cathedrals. The genius who built the Brooklyn Bridge should take his place alongside the one who built Notre-Dame de Paris. So I want to make you aware how much the art world is cross-cultural, intercultural, that artists travel. They travel since the one who told about the travels of artists, the first one is Vasari in 1475 in The Lives of the Artists. He tells, why does Perugino leave Perugia for Florence? Because in Florence there are the best patrons and the best collections. So the artist is the one who travels the world, and because he travels the world, he teaches us about the world. So these are the Europeans. Now let's turn to the second generation of American artists, that the 1920-1940, towards an emancipation from the European model. And here we have Alexander Calder and Stuart Davis, represented by these two beautiful works, Entraigue and Columbia Records' album Cove, which I like a lot, both of them. Now, if we focus on Calder, there's a very specific reason which I find important. First of all, because he's going to break totally the tradition of the American artists coming to study in Paris. He's the son of two artists and the grandson of artists. Both his grandparents and his parents have come to Paris to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in the colonies in a very traditional way. He's coming to Paris and will study in a very different way. He's going to develop new strategies for his training in Paris. First of all, that's what he writes to his mother. Dear Mom, I got a second box and palette at the Chaumière and some paints and brushes, all for $11. Also a couple of canvases, but I have not painted yet. I decided that I could work better here by going back to Étretat, so I am remaining here and will try to get a studio of some sort at once. Basically, he's playing the spoiled brat. He doesn't work, he doesn't go to the École des Beaux-Arts, he doesn't want to do like everybody else does, and his parents are desperate. What are you doing in Paris? What are you doing? Why aren't you going to the École des Beaux-Arts? No, he's not doing that. He's doing something else, and that's where his genius lies. He he is crossing the artificial boundaries between art and industry. You know, he was trained as a mechanical engineer at Stevenson's. He's abolishing the traditional hierarchy between high and low culture. He's breaking the social barriers between social classes in France. He's traveling all through Europe with Paris as a home base. He's exhibiting in Paris, Berlin, Madrid, New York, Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's meeting the right people at the right time. He's managing his career as a businessman. He's transforming his 6 years in Paris as a catalyst for his creativity. And these are the works that I know the Peters have the best little, but I didn't show it. I know it, I didn't show it. Red Horse, and so these are the first little animals he's doing. You know, and everybody thinks he's going to do that all his life, you know, this little, okay, that's what he does in 26. Then he's doing his circus in 28, 29. And then he's starting to evolve, entitled 1932, entitled 1934, Stillfish 1934. And these are the people who influence him in Paris. First, Juan Miró, that he meets in 1928, and he does a portrait of him, which is beautiful, I think. And these are the works of Miró that have influenced him. Then he's discovering Mondrian, whom he meets in Montparnasse in 1930, and he described that it's a shock that started things for him. And these are the pieces that Mondrian is producing at the time, you know. And most important is 1931, the meeting with Marcel Duchamp, who for the first time calls his strange works mobiles. So I think this combination of being influenced by Miró, Mondrian, and being verbalized, being described, being conceptualized by Duchamp is extraordinary. Nobody, you know, like it's like Rauschenberg, you know, the combines. Who, you know, nobody knew what it was until it was called combine. Unless you put a name on something, it doesn't exist. At the moment Marcel Duchamp called it mobiles, it did exist. It got a legitimacy, right? Then it's a very important person, Pierre Matisse, the son of Henri Matisse, who's a dealer in the United States, in New York, who's showing Calder together with Miró, and showing the combination of the American and the European, and how important this cross-cultural thing is taking place. So those are the presentations of the shows. And this is Pierre Matisse with Calder in his studio in 1936. And these are the works Pierre Matisse shows, and you see how similar they are, both in color and in shape. Miró and Calder showed at the same place. So in this respect, a gallerist has an extraordinary big importance because he makes the relationships between the artist and the works. So now we, at the same time that Calder is finding his genius, using Paris as a catalyst, what's taking place in the United States, and that's why I wanted to focus on Calder, because at the same time in the United States, this brilliant man, there's no other way to say, is transforming, is creating MoMA in 1929 as the hub, the center for European modernism. And he's criticized by the American artists that he's not showing them enough. But he transforms radically the city of New York, but that's what he says at the beginning. All over the world, the rising tide of interest in modern movements in art has found expression not only in private collections, but also in public galleries. Nowhere has this tide of interest been more manifest than in New York. But New York alone, among the great capitals of the world, lacks a public gallery where the founders and the masters of the modern schools can today be seen. That the American metropolis has no such gallery is an extraordinary anomaly. New York, if fully awakened, would be able in a few years to create a public collection of modern art which would place her at least on a par with Paris, Berlin, and London. So New York was a provincial city in 1929 when he wrote that text. And we have to remember that. It's extraordinary how quickly he transformed New York into the center of modernism. But he got a big help. You know, first of all, that's the first exhibition with Cézanne, Seurat, Gauguin, and Van Gogh. That's when they get the Demoiselles d'Avignon, this absolute masterpiece of the 20th century. And you know why he got it? Because the owner of this piece, Jacques Doucet, a French couturier, had decided to donate it to the Musée du Louvre, but the Musée du Louvre refused it, simply, because it came from an anarchist or communist Spanish painter, and they didn't want him. Because in France, the people who decide which donations they accept are civil servants with a very traditional taste, and this is what France lost. Okay? So this text tells you a little bit about these cross, power games between countries. Now, at the same time, WPA, of course, for 10 years, 1933, 1943, which is bringing the artist to another status in the country, everywhere. And this is what Henri Matisse writes to André Masson. When you see the United States of America, 1933, you will understand that someday they will have painters. Because it's not possible in a country of such dazzling visual spectacles that they would not have painters one day. Just to show you what the Europeans felt about this country. They might have painters someday, So this is history. At the same time, in Europe was going on this horrible show, Entartete Kunst, where, all the works of European modernists are being put together as things to destroy. There are 650 paintings, and it started 19th of July, 1937 in München. No modern show was seen by more visitors ever in the world. Okay? 2 million visitors in München, 2 more million when the trip traveled all over Germany. 20,000 visitors a day. So Alfred Barr had gone to Europe in 1925. He had seen the beautiful flowers of European modernism in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Russia, in France, in Czechoslovakia. He decided to pick up these flowers and bring them to the United States, where the soil was a soil of civil society brought together by the 3 ladies of MoMA. Then he created MoMA, 1929. And little did he know that in 1937, all those flowers would be destroyed by the tanks of fascism in Europe. So when I told you earlier that he got help, Alfred Barr, to bring up his MoMA, the help was the destruction of European modernism by the fascist political movements. And I cannot help putting a footnote here to tell you that in France, in a year and a half, we might have a fascist president, Madame Le Pen, and I am very worried about that. Because when you talk about art, you talk about society, you talk about religion, you talk about politics, you talk about history, you talk about institutions, you talk about genders, you talk about geography, you talk about economy. And art is not floating. Art is deeply embedded in a society. And we all know how history is important. So I just wanted to let you know that as a French person living in Paris, I might soon be coming to the United States if we have a... And I hope you're going to welcome me. 3rd generation. There's no more need to travel to Europe Why? Because Europe has come to New York. Jackson Pollock learned European modernism by going to MoMA, by seeing the shows of Alfred Barr, by going to the Picasso shows of Alfred Barr. Jackson Pollock did not need to be legitimized by a trip to Europe because he could see what was at MoMA. So it's a time of autonomization from Europe and affirmation of American art, both for David Smith and for Jackson Pollock. Here are the beautiful works that your collection owns, and I cannot help have a special mention for Agricola, which is now part of the Smithsonian. Now, 1945, New York has become a European capital. Why? Because of the refugees who have been forced to flee Nazism in Europe, and we see them all, you know. So they gather. New York becomes the refugee place for Europeans. And this is what Fernand Léger tells. America is not a country, it is a world. There are no limits here. One is confronted with endless reserves of energy. There is incredible vitality, constant activity. I'm struck by the intensity of the contrast. An American culture based upon what is best in Europe is being born. This spiritual alliance that must and will endure is a guiding light, a rallying point upon which French eyes are focused. So everybody is more and more focusing on American energy. Now, here is a man that you mentioned earlier, Virginia. This is Leo Castelli, together with Sidney Janis. And this is what Leo Castelli does in 1950. He's 51. He's curating a show at Sidney Janis' gallery. And this show is called Young Americans and French Painters. He's not yet a gallerist. He's still a collector who lives out of his wife's money until the age of 50. He's going to live out of Ileana's money, okay? And when she's fed up with him and his girlfriend, she's going to throw him out to get a divorce, and he's forced to work, and he becomes a gallerist. So good luck. Anybody who still needs a job at 50 can become a Leo Castelli. Anyway, why did he do this show? Because at the time, he felt that American painters needed to be pulled by European painters. If he said Pollock was like Lanskoi, it would be good for Pollock. This is what he did. I wanted to stress the idea that American painting was just as good as the European, the great Europeans. So I compared Pollock with Lanskoi, Klein with Soulages, de Kooning with Dubuffet, Gorky with Matta, David Smith with Léger, Coulon with Cavallon. This was something I wanted to demonstrate for a long time. So here we have your beautiful Léger and your beautiful Dubuffet, you know? So basically the whole history of European modernism and American art can be taught through your collection. Michel Seffort, who sees the show, he's a great critic, says that in the winter of 1950, American abstract art reached what we might call its zenith. I made a complete tour of the New York art scene, rummaged in every corner, and I can say that there is indeed a young generation of American painters who are gaining notice, with accent that can be very pure and violent. Before that, everything was imported. Today, most Americans think that their young painters are every bit as good as ours. Some even claim that they are better than the ones in anemic Europe, an old world at the end of its run. And you see that Europe has been destroyed. Europe is under the GI Bill, you know, and America is taking over. And somebody's asking Pollock how modern art came into being, and he says it didn't grow up out of the blue. It's part of a long tradition, dating back with Cézanne up through the Cubist, the post-Cubist, to the painting until today. Now, fourth generation, we're in a completely different world. It's a co-optation of the European model. And we're going towards the absolute hegemony of American art. Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol. By the way, it's the way that when I met Leo Castelli the first week I was in New York in 1989, when I came as a cultural counselor of the French embassy, 2 weeks after I arrived, he said, oh, you're the new cultural counselor. Oh, you're going to take New York City by storm because you don't look like your predecessors. They were old men in gray suit with gray ideas. And dressed as you are with a transparent skirt, you're going to take New York City by storm. So tomorrow I have a show with Roy. You come for the show, you stay for the dinner, and I'll teach you American art. That's how everything started for me. So I owed Leo Castelli this book because he did teach me American art a little bit. So these are the beautiful works you have in your collection from Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol. Were they traveling to Europe? Yes. Andy went on the GI Bill. Roy went on the GI Bill. And Leo Castelli here, with his gallery, turned his gallery into a real institution, with all the institutions of the city. He was a collector who became a dealer. He was very close to those guys. He got for Bob Rauschenberg the Golden Lion in Venice in 1964, which was the first time an American artist was recognized in Venice, the first time. He was here with Andy Warhol and Roy and taking care of his artists. He created satellite galleries all over the United States. He created satellite galleries all over Europe. He was somebody who didn't want to sell paintings but create collections. And he was somebody who empowered the American artist, who respected the artist. Why? Because Leo came from Europe, because his ancestors were already agents of the Medici in Tuscany in the Renaissance, and because he was trained in Europe. So the models he knew from Europe, which is an artist is somebody you respect. An artist is somebody that brings symbolic value to the world. Those models he imported to the United States. And he managed to revolutionize the status of the American artist. Because of him, Jasper Johns is rich today. Because of him, Bob Rauschenberg is respected. Because of Leo Castelli, Obama said that he's collecting Rauschenberg. And because of Leo Castelli at Rauschenberg's funeral service in 2005, I remember Bill Clinton came over. It was the first time I saw an American president giving a tribute to an American artist, and he said Bill is the best, Bob was the best of us. And it started with Kennedy, went on with, and this was completely new. This transformation took place over the 20th century. And now what Roy Lichtenstein said about his work, I started to use the work of modern masters as subject matter, as Picasso's Woman with Flowered Heart. Instead of using subject matter that was considered vernacular or everyday, I used subject matter that was celebrated as art. The Picasso is converted to my pseudo-cartoon style and takes on a character of its own. Artists have often converted the work of other artists to their own style. And this is precisely what Lichtenstein does, cooptation. As a conclusion, and I'm exactly in time, Virginia, did you see that? Did you see that? Perfectly in time. Nona, did you see that? You gave me a little card. Listen, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, I'm right 40 minutes. As a conclusion, here it is. This is the Sam Weber collection with Julie Walters. Miro, Calder, Lichtenstein. This is perfectly an illustration of what I try to do. Calder in Paris got his influence from Miro, and Lichtenstein is now co-opting Calder. I'm just sorry that your mobile is not moving here in the collection. It should be moving, I asked. It's not moving because but the Lichtenstein is static, which shows that it's a cooptation, right? Now, just the last word, just to make my point clear, the work of art is an object sacred and consecrated, and is the fruit of an immense enterprise of symbolic alchemy, to which collaborate with equal conviction and very disparate profits all the operators involved in this production chain, that is, the obscure artists and writers, as well as the consecrated masters, the critics and the editors, as much as the authors, the enthusiastic clients, no less than the convinced salesmen and the collectors. So, for me, your collection is a great illustration of that art is a mirror of a society, that the artist is an essential citizen. He is a whistleblower. He is at the forefront of society. And it's in museums that the new culture of tomorrow is being built. So my question at the beginning was, why did you collect art instead of collecting, expensive cars or expensive wines, I think that maybe we can talk about that during the discussion. What is the meaning of an art collection? What symbolic power does a work of art carry with it? I just want to end, I cannot help end of that man with whom I spent 5 years of my life, Mark Rothko. Just tell you that I have been giving talks about him in March when I came to the first publishing of the book, and I described him with the same approach as an immigrant in the United States. He left Russia after the pogroms as a kid. He was 10 years old. And he became an artist because he could not become a medical doctor at Yale because Yale was anti-Semite at the time. So he was forced to become an artist. But he became a very intellectual artist, an educator, a philosopher, many more things. And it's in his migration status, the fact that he was forced to migrate, that you find his strengths. And at a time today when the migration issue is such a huge issue in Europe, I think it's useful to remember that migrants, immigrants, refugees, exiled, call them the way you want, like Picasso, and it's a good transition for you, my dear. Like myself, I left Algeria, I was 14 years old. Those people have more languages, more countries, more experience than people who don't move, and this is why we like them, the artists. Thank you.
I don't know about you all, but I am totally exhilarated. Now, we will take about a 20-minute break. Annie has agreed to sign books in the auditorium lobby. So we will flash the lights when it's time for you to come back in and start the next part of our program. Well, Sam and Julie, you two are amazing collectors and incredible philanthropists. Some of the people here tonight have been the beneficiaries of your generosity through support that you've provided to so many different organizations, all of which are working to make this world a better place for us all to live. I love it that you care about the planet.
We all have to care about the planet.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
I love it that you've established scholarships for students in multiple educational venues who otherwise would have limited, if any, opportunities to explore their intellects and their talents. You care about wildlife and help groups that protect and rescue animals. And rumor has it, and I have met Bobo, Boo-boo?
Boo-boo.
Boo-boo. That the number of animals that live in your house test to your personal commitment to rescuing creatures of this world. But most special for us who are here this evening is that you've supported museums, and especially ours, as we look for works that will enrich people's lives. Many of you all in the audience may not realize that over the past 15 or so years, Sam and Julie have given 9 beautiful paintings and sculpture to the museum. And just yesterday, they said they want to make a gift of David Smith's absolutely remarkable sculpture, Agricola 4. What can I say? It's an honor and a pleasure to know you both. So, now that I've totally embarrassed you in front of all of your friends, let's talk a little bit about the collection.
Okay.
You collected a lot of artists in depth. We have 5 Alice Neils in the gallery. We have 5 Romary Beardens in the gallery. Roy Lichtenstein, Wayne Thiebaud. So how do you decide what to pursue and how to, are you aiming to cover the range of the career? How do you think about these guys?
I was afraid you'd ask questions like that. I don't think there's ever been a plan to buy more Alice Neils or more Wayne Thiebauds. I think we liked the artist. We had determined we liked it. If we bought one, why not buy another if it came along and we liked it? So I find it hard to find a plan that I ever had. But I've never hesitated to own more than one of the same artist. I mean, why not? So I can't, I don't know, Julie, did you feel there was ever a plan?
It was easy. Once you decided you liked an artist, then you could easily buy another one.
Well, a lot of the artists, I mean, Alice Neil again comes to mind. The paintings are very personal. They were very personal to her, and I love it that she painted a portrait of your son.
Well, she saw Michael, and she liked anxiety, and he had lots of it. When I got a chance to meet Alice Neil, and I can't say that meeting artists is particularly something I try to do. I mean, if you happen to meet them, I want to like the painting, not the artist. But Alice was a New York icon, not always positive, because she liked communism for too long, and she had abandoned a child to paint. And I went to her apartment in Spanish Harlem because I had bought one of her paintings and I wanted to buy another one. And she had every painting she had ever done in her apartment. She was that unpopular that she couldn't sell paintings. And the people she painted wouldn't buy the painting because the paintings weren't complimentary. They were real. And I found her a fascinating woman, and it's interesting that we collected her and her prices didn't go up, which was sort of an indication that America never forgave her for her love of communism, which she thought was socialism, and abandoning her child for her craft. But Europe has now adopted her. She's now represented in London, and her paintings are selling, not like hotcakes, but very well, and for bigger prices in Europe than ever in America. So it's strange that listening to Annie talk about how America copied Europe and things moved over here, that here's an American painter that paints people and is more popular now in Europe than in America. I don't know what that means,
I
but
never thought it was because of the communism. I thought it was because her paintings had an edge to them, and it wasn't always attractive. So the people that she painted didn't buy them, and they just sat there, and she collected. I mean, she kept them.
no, she was hated in the New York press. They wrote time and time again about how she supported Stalin and didn't realize what his regime was really about. She had a big problem in New York.
But the people didn't like their portraits.
Well, that too.
Yeah. But some of them light up.
We don't agree very often, even Bill. Isn't that strange for a husband and wife not to agree?
Well, there are a lot of fun pieces in the collection. There are whole areas that just, and individual pieces, that make me laugh. The Botero smoking woman, with her little heel kicking up her ankle, kicking up her heel. The Wesselman, which, for those of you who came on my tour Wednesday afternoon, I described totally as a feminist document. I'm not sure everybody totally bought into this, but I don't know. Did you get a sense of that kind of thing when you were choosing these pieces?
Wesselman and Botero?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, we're sort of old-fashioned. We like the solid things that we can interpret without a catalog or without necessarily a rendition of what we're looking at. So we like to look at things that are pleasing, and if the sex is there, that's great. But I don't necessarily think that every piece has that quality. But the Wesselmans and the Boteros have a lot of it, right?
I think so. Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting. We met Botero. We had dinner in New York with him one time. As I say, I don't try to meet artists, but it was a dealer named Gary Nader that put us together, and he was representing them. And he was the most, for his paintings, you know, we sort of asked, why do you have so many plump people? Everything's plump in his pictures, or fat, or whatever. And he said, well, I grew up in Colombia, outside of Medellin, I think it was. And the local house of prostitution, when he was a young kid, 13, was down the street. He'd go down and look in the window, and all the hookers were fat. So I don't know if that added to my collecting knowledge or not, but I mean, I knew that.
But
So much for meeting the painter.
but you get some great stories when you do.
Oh, you do, yeah.
Well, so how do you find things?
Oh, the dealers find you. I mean, we look at a lot of catalogs. You know, we have probably, I would say, Jerry Peters and Lily Dowling probably have done more for us as dealers than anybody else. And I don't know, I guess I just met Jerry early on, and you know, he was very knowledgeable with George O'Keeffe, who I love, and some Western paintings, which we also collected. So they probably, as much as anybody, I wouldn't ask them whether they ought to buy something or not. I would call them, or they might call me about a painting, but I would call them and say, I like this. Would you look at it? What do you think of it? So, you know, you get a little help on conditioning, on what's going on in the market, whether the price is realistic, but I never use dealers to pick something out for me. I always felt I like that or I don't like that, and as Jerry, I'm sure, would tell you, he's probably shown me 100 things for every one I like. So I never had anybody that knew what I liked necessarily, but
I think before you even buy from a dealer or buy at an auction, you have to get comfortable with art. And you have to look around a lot, go to the museums, travel with your art groups that take you around and show you great collections, so you know what you're looking at and you know what you like and you're comfortable with. Then the pieces that you want when they show up, again, it's easy to buy them once you're comfortable and you've seen enough of it to know that you like it, rather than what someone else suggests to you.
you have to be opinionated. I mean, there's so much out there. I mean, just look at the auction catalogs we're all talking about. They're coming out. I mean, you get a box from Christie's of 10 pounds of catalogs for next month. I mean, it's overwhelming. And of course, even when it was not that overwhelming, you have to be opinionated. So somewhere along the way, you have to say, I like that artist, I like that color. But I would say the only thing I can think of about is we like color. I'll tell you one story. When we bought the Agricola, we were up in New York, and I'm at the auction at Christie's waiting for it to come up, and up comes a Lucian Freud of a naked lady weighing 250 pounds, maybe 300, laying on a sofa, naked. And I'm looking at this picture, and it sells for $53 million. And then the next picture is a Rothko, you know, wonderful artist, but $73 million. And then the Agricola came up, and it was a lot less. But I couldn't believe that I saw that money going toward that art. I mean, it just shocked me.
There is a...
Opinionated. We're opinionated. He's opinionated.
So do you all need to agree on everything you buy? And a lot of couples won't buy, you know, if the wife doesn't like it or if the husband doesn't like it, they decide they're going to wait for something that they can agree on, or are you all fairly independent? And
I think we have agreed on mostly everything.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll come home and there'll be a sheet hanging over a painting I bought. It doesn't bother me for long because, you know, eventually she takes it down.
Or it can go in the closet.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that's been pretty clear is that you guys are readers. You must have, I don't know, 50 books on O'Keeffe. I don't know, 75 books on Picasso. I mean, you're reading a lot about the artists that you care about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're going to play this game, there's no question it's a game. I mean, I love collecting. I often wonder why people don't collect, whether you collect watches or toys or whatever. As I always say, I come down in the morning, I can look at a Picasso. I mean, you know, that beats, you know, breakfast. So it's constantly a source of enjoyment. And a lot of other things we do, you know, don't measure up to that standard. So I wonder why people don't all collect, even if it's watches or little objects. But it's funny, I would say most people, I play poker and I have friends come to the house for poker, they sit in front of Picasso's and never ask me what it is or where it is. They don't even see it. I've had guys come into games for 10 years in my house, never ask me who that painter is, or is that they don't know what it is. So most people, and I don't know if it's because of our educational system or what, don't get hooked on art in a serious way. Because it is, if you're going to get serious about it, it's expensive. Very expensive. You got to give some other things up. So I've always wondered I don't know why I got hooked early. I mean, I started buying posters when I was going to law school and had the money, and it always seemed to be very enjoyable to look at those pretty things. I don't know what else to say, you know. I like that Eugene Delacroix quote, you know, if it's a feast for your eye, collect it, if you can afford it. But I think, you know, giving scholarships to young students, very rewarding, very rewarding. But art comes back big time. I mean, look at the fun we're having here today. So art mixing with the museum crowd is, I mean, really, I mean, last night was a very, I expected it to be good, but it went far beyond that. Why so many people could connect and get a good feeling out of it, that's what we all want, and it's hard to find. I don't care what you do. So I recommend art collecting to anybody, especially Picasso.
So are you waiting for the next great thing to come along? Is there anybody special you're keeping your eye out? Or do you want to clue us in, especially with the auctions coming up in a few weeks?
Be careful because we're not putting anything in storage. So he has to slow down.
Yeah, we've run out of wall space. That's why we're doing a lot of sculpture, because you can move it outside. And that's the truth. I mean, you know, I do have my own, a nice Miro sculpture coming up in the auction, yeah, and it's so wonderful. You know, I'm afraid I'm going to buy it.
Uh-oh.
Collecting is a disease. It's definitely a disease, and when you get hooked, it can pull you along. It can pull you along, and especially when you have museum directors telling you that's great. Buy 2 of those.
Right. One for you and one for me, right?
That's right.
We're not worth our salt if we don't go ahead and make suggestions. So, do you have favorites?
Favorite paintings?
Painting, sculpture. I mean, what's been happening? I've given a couple of tours now, and everybody says, "So, what's your favorite?" And
Yeah.
you know, I can have a couple of favorites for each room.
Yeah. Well, Julie, you have.
Well, you have to love Thiebaud and Joseph Stella, Marsden Hartley. I mean, in fact, I have to say that the pieces in our collection, I mean, how can you not love all of that? Because it's all great to look at. It's got color, it's got life, and it's some of the best. We think we've avoided buying some bad pieces, and we've had maybe I can remember one piece we sold that we didn't think it was the best piece. So we are pretty happy with the ones that we have kept, and having sold only one because we didn't think it was a great one.
That's a pretty remarkable track record, actually.
But that's what we're happy with. You know, that's us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our first purchase that I remember of a substantial painting was an Albert Bierstadt. And you can see where we've come. We've come a long way from there. That's gone. And there's nothing wrong with that painting, nothing wrong with that
That's
painter.
not the one we sold because we liked it, but we just wanted to move away from that. That wasn't the one.
It's a nice journey. I recommend it to anybody. I think it's a lot of fun, and you can do it at different levels. As I said last night, investing in the stock market or whatever is dangerous at best, and paintings have been better.
So the hunt goes on.
The hunt goes on.
And we're happy to give some more away, too.
Well, that's
If
good.
we get
That's good
more.
music. I mean, if you have no more wall space, we can have a conversation.
That's right.
Another conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, what else are we, I mean, you have amazing collecting stories. I mean, I'm sure you have stories about the ones that got away, but the stories of the ones that didn't get away, that are upstairs here.
Well, getting away, I can just tell one story that about 6 months ago, I think it was, maybe I could remember time, I was bidding for a Debacorn, who we have the Ocean Park series, and the ones in their show are all watercolors, and this was an oil Ocean Park, so I wanted to buy it, and you know, they're a little pricier, and I'm bidding, and somebody who's representing me says, Sam, one of the Koch brothers is bidding against you. I said, okay, stop. I didn't get it.
But there was the Leger in particular, I remember, was at auction, and I think we didn't buy it, but it didn't sell at the auction either. So somehow, I think 6 months later, it was available again. I think we paid double for it. But I had said that I thought it was so terrific and I wanted it. And 6 months later, he was ready to buy it, but we paid double. I don't know why it went up. But since then, it came out of the Whitney Museum of American Art. So it came from a great collection, the Whitney, and they had deaccessioned it. And since we had bought it, a couple of New York dealers approached us that they really had wanted it, or that they would love to have it for their collection. I mean, we never sold anything. So we would not take, they were going to offer us more, but we wouldn't take it at that point because we got what we wanted.
Yeah, well, you know, in collecting for the museum, you know, I've never regretted, not that we ever have, paying what seemed to be a hair too much. I've only ever regretted the ones that we were not able to go for.
Yeah.
And it's
Wow.
true. It's true.
That's the auction game. You don't know when it's going to stop.
That's right. That's right. Well, how about, speaking of stopping, we take a 5-minute, where's my cheat sheet here? We take a very short break, and then we really want to make sure that Gijs has plenty of time to tell us about Picasso, and that we have a few minutes for questions in the end.
Good.
Okay.
You ready to?
You don't want to answer any questions now?
Let's wait until the end.
All right, you do
I
it.
mean, that way I have my orders and I follow them. So,
Okay. Can I take my speaker off?
yeah,
Yeah.
they should have. Are we just about all back? Well, Gijs van Hensbergen is truly a man of the world, so the perfect speaker, along with Annie, for tonight's program. He's a connoisseur, he's a cultural commentator on both visual and culinary arts. I love the idea of mixing art and food. He's a chef and a scholar who works on television, documentary films, and is one of the world's leading experts on Picasso. He writes for a whole host of magazines, periodicals, some of which we all read routinely: the Wall Street Journal, the Times, Burlington Magazine, and of course Vogue, to name just a few. And in his spare time, Gijs van Hensbergen lectures around Europe. It's fascinating. There is a bio in your program. Take a look. He is all over this country talking to us about things that matter to us. But among all of his very many accomplishments, for me, one of the most compelling is his biography of what I think may well be the most powerful painting of the 20th century, Picasso's Guernica. Please join me in welcoming Gijs van Hensbergen.
Thank you, that's very kind. Just first of all, to say that in the past it's been, and I hopefully again, a complete honor and a privilege to travel with your museum. We did Spain together, and I met many of you. I've been working for the last 10 years, actually, far too long, says my editor, on a book on American art collectors and the birth of philanthropy and patronage. So for me it was amazing to actually see collectors getting passionate about things. And I was trying to think, I'm a little bit like a kid in a sweet shop, running upstairs just before, got off the plane, straight into the gallery, see what the collection actually looked like in situ. And like a kid in a sweet shop running around, it's absolutely wonderful. And I was trying to think of words to describe the character of it, because there is a very distinct character about this collection. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Brave, fresh, bold, strong, and most importantly, I think, life-affirming. Every painting there, and I walked in, and of course my heart sung when I looked at those Picassos, but you turn the corner, and the Liechtensteins don't look any less. Now that tells me something about a collector's eye. Someone, or both of you, who are prepared to be so bold and go for things which really speak, like this Picasso that we've got here. It's fascinating, but there are also things which I've just discovered working in the last month or whatever since I got to see in illustration some new discoveries, which I hope I share and help you show why you've got such a good eye and why your instinct is so correct. Working with John Richardson for the last few years on and off, I've got to understand, and it's John's kind of mantra, which is chronology, chronology, chronology. You've got to look at the dates, and it'll start throwing up things. So if you look at this, for instance, this is 37. This is December, woman with an orange berry. It's Marie-Thérèse. And it's a celebration of her beauty. He loved putting her into these soft hats and this wonderful pattern making. I'll just show you a photo of her and his relationship with her, because he did actually want his women, or he preferred submissive, a woman that would buckle under in some senses, but also someone who adored him, who revered him, someone who would actually do almost anything for him, be the sacrificial lamb as well. But she, I think, was special. I think actually that maybe she really was the love of his life. I found documents in a museum recently which she's still writing to him in the 1950s. They've broken up years before. And, I think this kind of passion came also out of tragedy. because the picture on the right-hand side is her just after she almost died in 1932. He almost lost his Marie-Thérèse. She was swimming in a kayak, rowing a kayak down the River Marne. She capsizes, her sister gets her out, but she swallows some of the water. She gets Weil's disease, and all her hair falls out, which was a kind of pride and joy. And Picasso wasn't good when a woman doesn't live up to her promise, which is cruel, of course it is, but don't shoot the messenger. Let's have a look at other depictions. Well, Maya is born of that wedlock. We get Marina Toramaki, and I remember being with Maya in Paris not so long ago, about 3 years back, and saying, kind of about the relationship with her mother, and suddenly she turned around and said, "Can you imagine a father who the first time he depicts me, I'm in the stomach of my mother on the side of a bull, and I'm about to be gored." What a strange imagination is that. Well, let's go across to Dora. Let's look at the dates again. March 28, 1939. She's a weeping woman. Her heart, I think, it's almost like spinning in a vortex. And we know that the weeping woman was what he always described as her real deep reality. And I think where Picasso is so strong, and that's also why I think you love his work so much, is that he is someone who has no turn-off tap between the subconscious and the conscious. That it's just, as Gertrude Stein said, he's always filling up like a well. You pull off the water, and there he fills himself up again. And I think sometimes looking at the things that you have bought, I suspect that's been very much the instinct that is right, I have to have it, and you don't quite understand yet why. And I think also your preference for late work, Picasso, is also, I think, absolutely spot on. I'm totally in agreement with it. I think you've got a wonderful vision to start buying things like that. But here she is. She's sad. She's March 28, 39. What's happened? Well, Picasso's mother has just died. Picasso has two nephews who... This is a portrait of Dora very quickly. And Guernica, of course, has already taken place in the Spanish Civil War. This is going to be the elephant in the room, because I think it's through, if we take the painting and the subject out of it, let's just look at it as a painting and forget about the history behind it, of which I've spent years studying, but just see it for what it is. It's a painting which has this kind of fantastic immediacy, cartoon quality. And I think that's also what carries on, obviously, into the late work. Well, his mother dies. Picasso becomes the Prado director. He also has this very near experience with this sudden fleeing in January, just before that portrait of Dora. 450,000 refugees have to cross the border into France, away from the Franco troops. And both his nephews, Javier and Fin Velato, are amongst them. And it goes, they're put into these internment camps. These are photographs by Robert Capa. It's terrible. Picasso manages to, and actually pays for the Prado Museum to move lock, stock and barrel out of Spain and up into Geneva for safety. He takes his role as director seriously. Well, let's go to Françoise Gillot. Françoise, she comes into his life right at the end of the war. By now, Dora is already the weeping woman, but also being tortured by Picasso. I mean, he would do very nasty tricks, and he'd sometimes do them in the paintings, as well as he'd choose the hat from one and put it on the other. Or sometimes he'd buy the same hat and put them on each of them, and then they'd bump into each other on the streets. But it was a way of him kind of manipulating and controlling. But what I think about this one in your collection, which is so appropriate, is he said, I never painted the war, but the war is always in my work. And I think there is a type of grisaille, these blues, this kind of austerity that you see in this painting that is very poignant and very sad. And she's an extraordinary woman. She's still alive. She's living in New York. She must be 92, 93 years old. And, of course, the only one to escape the Minotaur. Here she is. A little detail which I had never really picked on is that she's got the Minotaur hanging around her neck. She wasn't going to be throttled by it, and she slips away. In the background, we've got little very quick ink sketches of both Paloma and Claude, the two sons which she escapes from. She said, I was tired with living with a national monument, which of course Picasso never forgave her. And this last painting of the Gillot series is Woman on a Chair. I love the way that he often uses chairs as well, almost to be kind of like give off a bit of the identity. Here she is, she's a classic French intellectual woman. She's highly political. She's a very bright woman. She's very astute. She wants to be an artist herself and becomes one. He met her as she was. I mean, what a thing as an artist to become the partner of Picasso. It's not a competition you're going to win. Not many people did win, but what I love again about your collection is that Picasso gets his fair share of shakes by other people. It's good. But this is the one which I find amazing. Where are we? It's the date is the 16th of the 8th, 57. Did you ever think of working out what happened on that day? Well, I didn't until I had it drummed into me that every time that something is really dated, and this is dated in big letters, you should try and find out what's going on behind the scenes. And, well, what is it? It's kind of Mithraic figure of the sun. And on the either side we've got faces, and on the back we've got a lady. I think this is one of those kind of miracle buys. I think it's a talisman. I think it's very important in Picasso's life. I'm going to tell you why, because what happens in 57, it's a remarkable period in his life. Well, first of all, he's got problems on his hand. There's Salvador Dali, clown, idiot, who decides that he's going to, well, he gets the Barcelona bishop to say a mass to try and save his soul, and he says he's going to get a submarine and kidnap Picasso and bring him back to Spain. Dali has a meeting with Franco and says that he's never met anybody as brilliant on the subject of art as Francisco Franco. And he gets himself in with the Francos. Well, that's one problem. The other problem is this. This is your Pollock on the left-hand side in that wonderful Namath painting. Pollock, of course, the previous year he dies, and he's now becoming massive, but massive in Europe as well. There's a wonderful book, Who Paid the Piper, in which it's shown how through people like Junkie Fleischmann and the Ford Foundation and whatever, that as part of soft power, American art was used to demonstrate that kind of democracy, as opposed to communism, expressed through the liberty of artists like Pollock, was something which set our society very much apart from the rigid, depressing communist rule on the other side. And of course, Picasso was the world's most famous communist at the time. Here he is with his new wife, Jacqueline. He met her at the Ramier pottery. So it's kind of a relationship with that pot as well, obviously, that it could have something to do with her. He tried and succeeded in turning her into a Spanish woman. He dressed her up. He kind of fashioned her into whatever happened. Well, in that summer of 57, just before the pot was made, she had a hysterectomy. She was lying in bed, and I tried to get a photo of it, but John has a wonderful photo at home of She couldn't come down for lunch, so they said, Douglas Cooper and John Richardson and Picasso said, well, we'll come up to your bedroom. And there's a photo that she took of them sitting around a table. And it was a time that I think she needed cheering up. And so on the back of the pot, there is actually a thing of a portrait of her. I mean, your gods are very good today. They wouldn't let me go round the back, and I kept on saying, can I please, please, please? But anyway, I'm sure that there'll be a chance when it's photographed in different ways of seeing this. So we've got this moment where we've got a sick, ill Jacqueline, and Picasso is about to set off onto something rather magical. But before I go into that, there's something else going on in the house. I mean, this is another pot at the same time. Adam and Eve, he's gouged sex out rather aggressively. It's a kind of yin and yang. There's again the sun up at the top. I mean, I think he's thinking, because of course ceramics and unglazed ceramics are very much a touchstone going back to Spain as well. And he's thinking about Spain a lot. Why is he thinking about Spain? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. First of all, he has this failure in 1951, I think one of his worst paintings ever, The Massacre in Korea, which means he falls out with pretty well all the West. It's a highly politicized and I think a failure as a painting. But what was extraordinary in 1957 was, now as the most famous communist, he had three friends, his three first friends, living in his house, effectively. Hélène Parmenin, she was there for most of the year. She was feeding back information to the KGB. David Douglas Duncan, a photographer, he takes this wonderful photograph of him in Sitting Bull's wonderful feathers, and apparently he went round all day scowling like a very stressed Native American Indian, pretending to be Sitting Bull all afternoon. Well, in 1957, David Douglas Duncan writes a letter to Vice President Nixon, in which he says, I know this, well, it actually starts off, can you imagine a letter to a vice president which starts off, hey buddy, I know this Picasso guy really well. He loves the Wild West. He loves horses. I reckon if we get him over to Wisconsin or somewhere in the Midwest or whatever, put him on a horse, we'll win him for the West. And you kind of think that that would never get a response, but it did. And Nixon said that, well, we obviously can't do it officially, but I think secretly we could actually get a plane and bring him over as long as there's no noise made. Well, in that year as well, the other closest friend, and he was the godfather of the son of Lucia Bosset and Luis Miguel Dominguin, the bullfighter. Dominguin is feeding back information to Franco. So three best friends, and they're all feeding to the different power bases. And it's Luis Miguel whose job it is to try and offer Picasso in that year, in 1957, a show. In Madrid, it's going to be the biggest retrospective ever, and he's trying to hook him in. Now, why is he hooking him in? Because Guernica is being shown all around Europe, and the ambassadors are sending back letters and saying, every time we put this painting up, the press about Spain is just so appalling. It's a disgrace, it's an embarrassment. What can we do about it? And so Picasso is offered a show. It's supposed to be kept secret, and it breaks in the Chicago Times, and so he doesn't get the show. But the day after your pot, when he's become the kind of Mithraic, and I think what he's getting is trying to give himself the energy to start taking on his greatest project ever, which is in 3 months, he paints Las Meninas in about 40, 50 different variations. It's him thinking about Spain. It's him showing that he can kick those young uns, and he can really, in a sense, take on all of the young Spanish people, the painters, show them that he's still got life. It's a strange year also because he's mourning the fact that 2 or 3 years before, Henri Matisse had died. And he always talked about the fact that Matisse was, when he died, I had nobody else to talk to. And I think part of the Velázquez series is that thing of finding somebody to talk to. And it was very interesting. Recently, there was a wonderful, I mean, this is a slight aside, but there was a wonderful show in the Prado recently where they had El Greco, and they put a Picasso version, and they put a Pollock version of an El Greco, and the Pollock looked just as powerful. And so great artists take on great artists. And this was his method of, in a sense, breathing life back into the whole kind of debate on Spanish art. It's, I think, rather miraculous. Of course, this is the original painting, and we can see how much he has to distort, how much, in a sense, the ego of the artist. Look at the size of Velázquez. Well, he was an artist with ego. I mean, he's created, in my opinion, the greatest single work ever in this kind of what was described as the theosophy of painting. But look here at this kind of illusionism that we get into the space, and then what Picasso, I'll just go back briefly, he does with it, and look how big now the artist becomes. It's this kind of Superman figure on the left-hand side. It's also his way of trying to deflate and trying to reread the art that we see. And I think, again, what is so wonderful, what a pity. I mean, the slides, I think, the images are fantastic, but the frames, when we get upstairs and you see the frames around them, there's 2 or 3 of them, when you realize how Picasso, when he really wanted to create, as Cézanne always wanted to do as well, an art for the museum, that this looks so slight. It's on cardboard. It was the first one you bought on cardboard, I think, yeah? And people said, you don't buy art on cardboard. Well, that's brave to buy art on cardboard. And I think, in a way, this may well be the strongest painting that you have of Picasso's. I totally adore it. When you get up close, it's worth looking upstairs and getting up as close as you're allowed to get up to it and just looking at the globby paint on the fingers. It's just thick, it's lush, it's someone who loves paint. It's wonderful. It's also, of course, a superb version of the Velázquez, Sebastián de Mora, who was the Philip IV's unfortunate son, Baltasar Carlos, who dies at the age of 17, who would have been the next king of Spain. This was his favourite. A very funny, he was a buffon, a jester, but he also became, I think, whenever we see a figure of a man, we also see Picasso, in a sense, doing himself. And of course, the little joke about Picasso being the kind of little emperor, the titan, well, in fact, what was it his mother said? If my little Picasso, if he wanted to have gone into the army, he would have ended up a general. If he'd have gone into the church, he would have ended up the Pope. But he became an artist, so he became Picasso. Picasso is full of myth. And another thing, going back to the pot again, the idea of the sun, the obsession he had with Mithras, the idea of the sun as the center of the universe, the idea of, also there was one, I'm sure it's apocryphal, but that doesn't matter. Why, like the Irish say, let the truth get in the way of a good story. The idea of that he could look at the sun straight in the eye, and it was the sun that blinked. Well, that tells us a little bit about Picasso's extraordinary visual recall and his capacity to reinvent. I think also a fascinating one is this one. Again, let's look at the date. It's 14th of the 7th of 58. That's Bastille Day. So he chooses a wonderful spoof of the Arlésiens to celebrate, or is it to denigrate, or is it just to have a good laugh at the French in national costume? Of course, Bizet's opera had been about the Arlésiens, Gauguin had done it, and Van Gogh had done it. And exactly at this time, there was a show on of Van Gogh's in Avignon. And Picasso goes to it, and he persuades the owner, or not the owner, the director of the museum, please, can I just touch a Van Gogh? Because he had to just I think, recognize the extraordinary power. So to buy a painting, I mean, if this was Jacqueline, I'd want my money back. I mean, you're not coming out of this very well. I mean, she looks a Shrek. She's a kind of screaming harpy. It might be actually that he's mixing up two women here altogether, that it's Jacqueline and actually Olga, his wife, who has been a kind of on his back for years, who's been going, not quietly insane, but going insanely jealous and being turned mad by the relationship with, well, what did they all say? Most of them commit suicide, but many of the ladies in his life say that after you've lived with Picasso, it's hard to live without the sun. And what a wonderful idea, going again back to that pot, that you're holding there a kind of talisman object, which is the day before he starts re-engaging and becoming Picasso the Spaniard again. I think also, of course, this capacity to leave half of it undone. That doesn't mean the picture isn't finished. It's exactly like the only person that he really, I think, thought was his equal and who he owed so much to. He said we were all, Cézanne was our father to all of us. And in fact, if you went to visit him in Vauvenargues, he would show you his Cézanne. You'd go upstairs and you'd go into an empty room and he'd open the window and there it was, Mont Saint-Victoire, because the castle was just under the Mont Saint-Victoire, and that's why he bought it, so that he could actually breathe the same air as Paul Cézanne, but also allow, I think, the canvas to breathe, like it does here, and like it does in so many of those late works. And then, of course, we get to the wonderful birds, and I know you whispered to me that you may be interested in another bird, another owl, that Picasso's owls mean something to you. I mean, their wisdom, of course they are. They're kind of brooding. They are, well, he found one, I think, after a car accident that had been badly damaged, and he nurses it back to life. Picasso and animals are, I think, very integral. I mean, Gertrude the goat was allowed to do anything in the studio. He loved chaining Gertrude up to the sculpture of Gertrude. And he'd say, look, that sculpture actually smells even worse than Gertrude. It's got more of the essence. And the quintessential quality, I think, of Picasso is being able to go right back and discover things like from this is a Mozarabic thing from the 10th century in Spain. He's always dredging from wherever it is. He's got, I think, a very Catholic and open, an incredibly open eye. And it's also one which, whatever he does, he says the easiest thing in the world is to have good taste, but it's far more difficult to have bad taste well. And if you go to the museum, the new one that's just reopened in Paris, I think you can see how Picasso has kind of incredible taste in sophistication, however crude it looks, however rough it looks, however playful, childlike. I think this is where his energy is, and I thank you for sharing your private passions with us. It's been fantastic to come and see this in the flesh. Thank you. Oh yes, of course. Sorry.
Totally lovely. I wish I'd had you to talk to before I wrote about these Picassos rather than afterwards. Now, Annie, if you'll join us, Sam, come on up. Now we have time for some questions and some answers and some thoughts and some reactions.
You're connected. You're connected.
Right, and we're connected.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Now we have microphones, so for those of you who would like to either go to a microphone to speak, to ask a question, to express thoughts, please do. Otherwise, if you raise your hand, we will bring a microphone to you. We're webcasting this, so it would be wonderful to have your questions loud enough for the people who are looking online to be able to understand what you're saying. Okay.
I have a question
Well-
for Sam. And in fairness, I work for the museum, but it's a legitimate question. So you came up with the idea, Sam, of having the museum acquire Modern Head by Liechtenstein, which we have installed outside the F Street entrance. And I think you know that it's become kind of a symbol of our whole building, of both museums, because it is a profile. So it connects with the portrait gallery, but it is by a wonderful American artist, so it makes the connection with Sam, our Sam meaning Smithsonian American Art Museum. What made you think of having us acquire that work? Did it just immediately resonate with you, or did you sort of mull it over? I would just love to hear your thought process.
Well, I found the piece at the Botanical Gardens in Miami. I was just walking through and saw it. And, you know, it struck as a wonderful piece. And when you think of a big, ugly building like this, you know, George Washington's stone messed it up, you know. Yeah, that's another interesting story. But I thought that it would look, you needed something large. You need something, I always think that you can't put a flashing sign over, this is a museum. And since we got moved off the mall, but that's another story by Paul Mellon, kicked us off the mall, that, you know, any visibility thing that said this is a museum or this is art is wonderful. So seeing the piece that large, blue, and Liechtenstein, you know, a wonderful artist, I just asked a local dealer to see if it was available. You know, it was part of a show in the Botanical Gardens, and it was. And then just through a series of circumstance, just lucky circumstance, Dorothy looked at the thing, said, oh, that could be in front of the Smithsonian. And the partner, the two people that owned it, was Jimmy Goodman and Jeffrey Luria. Jeffrey Luria was a dealer, and so was Jimmy. I knew Jimmy, and one thing or another, we ended up, the price on it, and that's another story, I don't know if I ought to tell it, but the dealer that I asked to find out who owned it was a gentleman in Miami who, I don't want to say his name. He went in and bought it, got a contract on it for $5 million. And he came to me and said, Sam, I bought it for you. I said, wait a minute, time out. I just wanted to find out if it was available and who owned it. In the meantime, Jerry Peters found out through Jimmy Goodman that it was for sale for $4 million. And he was going to mark it up for $1 million and sell it to me to help the museum. I said I wanted to buy it for the museum. This is my friend. So we went around him, went to Jeffrey Luria and Jimmy Goodman, and they said, and Dorothy, and said, we'd love to gift it to the museum since you're trying to buy it. Gary Nader actually jumped on Betsy and called her and said he was going to sue because we didn't buy it through him. I'm just telling you what this, you know, this world can be, this art world can be a little nasty at times. We all know that. But anyway, we got it as a gift. We had a wonderful party here that Dorothy came to and Jeffrey Luria, and we were just the middleman. We didn't have anything to do except we found it. It was kind of made for the corner of this building, And, you know, there are so many agencies in Washington to approve something, you know, NCPC and this fine arts and on and on and on. I think Betsy was concerned that we put it out there as an experiment. Julie and I did pay to move it and said, let's see if the world, you know, likes it. And everybody liked it. So that's all we did. We were kind of a mover and in the middle. And it was just a lucky thing that we found a piece that Dorothy felt. And I think she was a key element, that would be a wonderful thing for her husband to have on the corner of the Smithsonian. So she was the moving force. And, you know, it was just one of those lucky things you stumble into.
Can I add a footnote here, Sam? I was heading out for lunch one day last winter, and I'm walking along the corner by the sculpture. You know, I'm just walking along. And a woman is walking along holding the hand of, I don't know, 8-year-old child maybe. And I'm just walking behind her, not paying much attention. And this little voice pipes up and says, "Oh, look, Mom, there's an art museum."
Okay.
Your instinct was so true.
I want to say something here. Yesterday we saw these two jazz musicians, and you supported them with a fellowship. Now, you told me at the intermission, you know, I'm not interested in, you know, discussing things. I go with my heart to the art that I buy. Okay, it's my eye. It's intuition. Now, and I told you, you know, Mark Rothko didn't care for labels. He wanted the Rothko Chapel to be a sacred place, open to all at all times. Now, what is your attitude towards the gifts you're doing for the Smithsonian and the education power that they have for the public at large? You know, your art has been on your walls, and now your art can become visible by all. Is it something that you care for? You know, that this art that you have bought and donated will have a power of education for a larger public?
Well, that's a complicated question, Annie. I'm not sure.
We can stay. I'm here. Yeah. You know, I came from Paris to hear that. Answer, my dear. Excuse me. Not going to disappoint me. Connie Kaplan told me a lot of things about you. She said you're very bright.
Well, and I'm trying to stay alive, you know.
Okay, stay alive. Okay, now I came from Paris to hear that.
Though I had a scare recently, yeah. But, long term, I mean, you're asking me something that I really haven't figured out yet. I don't think we're going to give the collection away. It's probably too valuable. I mean,
I'm not asking
that. Yeah, I know. But I mean, some of the things you can do with funds like scholarships are wonderful. I mean, I'd have to say, as much as it's enjoyable to have an art collection and have this kind of couple of days, which is great for the ego, we give scholarships to 5 schools, and the letters I get from young kids. I'll tell you one story of Florida International University. You probably never heard of it. FIU is a school that has no standards. It's 100,000 students. If you apply, if you are walking, you can get in. So it's great for immigrants, and we got a lot of immigrants in Florida.
Mexicans.
We're all over, Cubans. And they had a lunch recently, and I have a scholarship program there. And this young Cuban stood up, and he said, I came to Florida, and I applied to FIU. I didn't speak English, and I had no money. They told me a guy named Rose had some scholarships there for, you know, young immigrants, whatever. And he just finished law school. Now, I mean, that gives you goose pimples. I mean, that you can do that for some young person. So what do I want to do in the end? Do I want to give the painting to a museum like a Smithsonian? I mean, do they need it? Does the world need it? Or is it better to sell some of that art and give it to kids in the scholarship? So I don't have an end of the game. I'm not trying to think of the end.
I'll take a few of the Picassos.
Huh?
I said I'll take a few of the Picassos.
Okay, yeah.
No, but I mean, obviously, you have
a strong interest in education. Obviously, you think it's a mitzvah, right?
The what?
It's a mitzvah.
It's a mitzvah, yes. It's
Do
good.
I
I understand, yeah. So, you know, I think the Smithsonian's, I don't know, did you hear what I said last night?
Yeah, of course, I heard everything.
Yeah, and I think museums are a haven, and I'm shocked today in our schooling, there's so little education about art, appreciation, or music. And we're even cutting it out of the elementary schools as the first thing because of funding. That, to me, is a disaster. In a world that, you know, I'm looking out there at people and I don't understand the elections of my own presidents. I'm saying, where are the good guys? I mean, where are the good guys? I mean, did you hear one person in a debate mention climate change?
No.
I think what's interesting, though, that your collection is a collection. I hadn't seen it in its entirety as we see it on the walls here, which is magnificent. But it has a character and it has an identity way beyond the little parts that you put together. And so I think that is something which good collectors, great collectors, have that kind of character about their collections, that you can identify a specific type of taste. And then it gets difficult to kind of peel away in the way that you say you only sold one painting because you've bought what you've liked. And that is a kind of, that's an odd one, isn't it? To think that you might want to get rid of your children.
Well, think about this for a second. This museum can't take a Picasso. It's against their charter. This is an American museum. Now, why do we have a museum that just collects American art? I'm not sure I agree with that philosophically. And maybe Betsy wouldn't either in a private moment, not in front of...
No, let's get Betsy to talk to.
But, so I can't give them anything. More than half of my collection is not American. So if you think of, you want to keep it together and, oh, maybe they'll give you a room, a Sam Rose room or a Julie Walters room where they put your collection, no chance. No chance. And that's why Dorothy Kaczynski at the Phillips is my good friend. I know, Dorothy, I know why. I figured it out.
So we have questions from the audience, from our friends out here that... Well, guys, following up on one of the things that you said, though, for me, there is something, you know, even sort of semi-conscious, I'm not sure it's fully conscious, there is something very personal about every painting and every sculpture. Not just personal in terms of you all, but in terms of what the artist was thinking, doing, being when it was being made. That for me is one of the most compelling things about this group of things as a collection. It's like voices are crying from their souls, or singing from their souls, or laughing, and inviting us to do that with them. And I think every single piece in the collection, you know?
There's a lot of lyrical, which I think is rather wonderful. I mean, the David Smith and equally, I mean, the Diebenkorns, I think, are just glorious. And there's a lot of celebration, actually, you said mitzvah. I mean, there is a lot of celebration there in those works, which, and the power also that it, and equally, the difficult pictures are difficult in a rather wonderfully fascinating, difficult way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I get more out of the paintings, and the paintings aren't getting anything out of me. I mean, it's wonderful to come down in the morning and look at these things. I mean, it's a great way to wake up before you get to your coffee, you know, and you can't put your stock certificates on the wall. So when people tell me, well, why are you putting money into that? I mean, you know, well, by the way, painting's been a better investment than anything. I mean, if you really, I never thought of it as an investment.
I know you said yesterday. Yeah,
but it's turned out to be, I don't have anything in the stock market that went up 10 times. But that Picasso you mentioned, the late one, on cardboard, I'll just say that to throw a number out. That was the first Picasso I bought, and I bought it for $500,000. What do you think it's worth today?
No idea.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you, but I don't. But I'm just saying it's a very nice rise. It's a very nice increase.
Trouble with that, though, is you have to sell it to take the ride.
I haven't sold anything, but, you know.
What happened to the Bierstadt?
Oh, what happened to it?
Yeah, I love Hudson River School painters.
It was a big one.
Yeah.
It was funny. I did sell that. It's one of the few things I sold because I ran out of space and my collection changed, you know, and I was moving more modern. And when I sold it, I'm trying to remember what gallery I gave it to. I sent it to the auction. They said, you know, it's a good beer show. It was a big one. They said, we can't prove it's American mountains and trees. We think they're German, so we can only give you half what we would normally are. Thought that was funny. I fell for that, but I don't know.
Yes. We have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I guess I represent this.
I'm sorry, can you speak up? We can't hear you very well here.
Yeah, sure. I just want to tell you guys that I parked my car about 3 hours ago, and I didn't know what I want to do. So I went online and I found this event, and I'm totally fascinated by it. So I'm just this general public that would walk by and would not even know this is going on, and this is amazing. So I have a relatively general question. What do you think, and where do you think are the centers of the modern art right now in terms of the painters? Like it used to be in Paris and then in New York, and what's going on now?
I can't approach this.
It's really a question for Annie.
For Annie,
I think.
okay,
Where is
so-
the center of
Okay, so
contemporary
I
art now?
curated a show at the Pompidou Center a year ago, which was revisiting another show which was called Magicians of the Earth. Magicians of the Earth took place in 1989, and it was the first time that curators of a major Western museum included non-Western artists, living non-Western artists, in their museum. It means for the first time they showed Africans, they showed Koreans, Russians, Chinese, Aborigine for Australia, South Americans. For a long time, too long a time, Western museums were closed, were locking off the non-Western artists. You know, they didn't exist. They were invisible to us, the leading world, the Western world. So since that show, and I did revisiting these Magicians of the Earth 25 years later, okay? So it was 2014. And my question was, what has happened between 1989, which seems very close to us, you know, until today? What has happened in the world? Actually, I noticed that the transition, these 25 years, has been as huge as the transition as during the Renaissance. Because since then, the apartheid was stopped in South Africa. The Berlin Wall was destroyed. The Chinese artists could get out. The African could move. You know, the changes politically were huge. And since then, a lot of biennials have opened up all over the world, you know, starting with Gwangju in Korea and everywhere. Now you see artists from all over the world gathering, or you see them in many events like Documenta, like Venice, you know, the first curator of Documenta, non-European, was Okwi Enwizo in 2002, you know, from Nigeria. And in Venice, 2002, there was the first African pavilion, and you could see. And now, you know, China has raised enormously, 600%. You know, the Chinese artists are everywhere. So I think these are the biggest transformations. And what shows the global transformation of the world is art, you know, and the artists. And the artists are really the whistleblower for the changes in our society. So the globalization, cultural globalization, is first perceived through the art world. You know, so I think it's extremely interesting that you're mentioning it, because most of the great moves in art today take place in China, Korea, India, you know, South America, Africa. I mean, it's extraordinary what's taking place. So, you know, the story that the Sam Rose and Julie Walters collection is telling us is an old story. It's a story of the 20th century. Now we're the 21st century. And at the 21st century, it's another story. So are you ready to collect African artists? Sam Rose?
I have some African art.
Tell me about that. Which ones?
We bought a bunch of sculptures from Zimbabwe. We were there.
Mm-hmm.
They cost more to ship than to buy.
And how did you relate to them? How?
Oh, we love them. They're all through our yard.
Mm-hmm.
We love them. We still have them. Do we have any other African art, Julie? Yeah, America.
I mean, Chinese artists?
Well, you know, I love the story of Al Wei. Is that his name?
Yeah,
The guy that makes-
Ai Weiwei. Mm-hmm.
I saw a
Ai Weiwei.
special on TV about, you know,
Yes, yes.
the trouble he's having in China.
Yes.
But he's a very strong person.
Yeah.
I follow it. I can't say that I like Chinese art. I do, the African art, I relate to. I mean, you know, that's in Picasso a lot. There's a lot of African feeling.
Sure.
You know, we collect lamb. You know, we're down.
Yes, Wilfredo Lam. So today, I mean, you have to know that 2 weeks ago, a show, Wilfredo Lam show, opened at the Pompidou Center,
Oh, really?
which is absolutely fabulous.
Is that right?
Because the curator, Catherine David, wrote her PhD on Wilfredo Lam. The show is mesmerizing, one of the best shows they ever had. You should come. Before.
Well, I've always thought that he affected Picasso a great deal.
Yes.
I don't think he gets the credit.
Yes, absolutely
But he was in
true.
Paris in
Absolutely.
the 20s. And
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, how interesting, this guy whose father was Chinese,
Right.
I mean, the mixture
Yeah.
of cultures
Yeah.
in his work also. And, you know, the jungle, the piece came from MoMA, this absolute beauty jungle. I mean, he is a major artist.
Well, we've been to Cuba several years ago, and we have Mendivi, Mariano Rodriguez, Lamb. We live in Florida in the winter.
Yeah, it's kind of
we're
close.
kind of
But I mean,
becoming Latin. We're learning the language.
What
in
was
Florida.
interesting was the Havana Biennial, you know, which started in 1984, and then how Peter Ludwig organized the Ludwig Foundation. There was a very unique experiment. I mean, in this, yeah. Fantastic. So you're not American completely.
No.
We may just have to get together here 10 years from now.
That's
Yeah.
exactly
The
what I
next
wanted to say,
generation.
Virginia.
That's right.
Yeah.
They can take Latin American art.
Okay,
That's
okay,
America's,
okay.
America.
Yeah, I see.
Goes all the way down.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much
Hoping
for
you
joining
don't
us
have
this
to-
evening. It has been a real special pleasure to have our two amazing scholars come and talk with us, and for Sam and Julie to be here with us tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.